The train carried me west through landscapes that grew wilder with each passing mile. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched Philadelphia disappear behind me. First the buildings, then the farms, then finally the last traces of civilization. The mountains rose ahead like walls, shutting me away from everything I'd known. I'd packed my life into 2 small bags. Everything else, the piano, the china, the silk dresses had been sold to pay Father's debts. The wedding ring sat in my pocket, already sized and sent. Even the courtship had been practical, conducted through letters arranged by my aunt. He's honest. She'd written, hardworking, but he'll never make you rich. I'd accepted because pride hurt less than charity. The memory of that last garden party still burned. The whispers behind gloved hands. Mrs. Harrison crossing the street to avoid me. Thomas Bradford, who'd courted me for 6 months, suddenly remembering pressing business elsewhere whenever I appeared. They'd wanted my father's money, his connections, his standing. When those vanished, so did they. I'd learned what I was worth to Philadelphia society. Precisely nothing. So I'd written back to my aunt, yes, I'll marry him. When does he need me there? The train's rhythm matched my heartbeat. Forward, forward, no going back. Each mile taking me further from humiliation and deeper into uncertainty. I tried to imagine the man waiting at the end of this journey. My aunt had described him in careful terms: quiet, self-sufficient, kind to animals. She hadn't mentioned love. Neither had I asked. Love was for people who could afford it. I'd been raised to believe that a good marriage meant security, comfort, a proper home. My mother had taught me to measure suitors by their prospects, their family names, their likelihood of advancement. She'd married for love and died poor. Worn out by hardship my father's business failures created. I'd promised myself I'd be smarter, but smart hadn't saved me either. The conductor called my stop a tiny platform in the shadow of mountains that made me feel impossibly small. I gathered my bags and stepped down into air that smelled of pine and altitude. Foreign and clean. A few other passengers disembarked. They had people waiting. Embraces and welcomes and the comfort of familiar faces. I stood alone, searching the sparse crowd for a stranger who would become my husband. He stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the station wall. Tall, weathered, with hands that knew work and eyes that held steady when they met mine. He wore clean clothes, but worn, and his face showed years of sun and wind. He wasn't handsome in the polished way of Philadelphia men, but there was something solid about him, something that didn't shift or calculate. "Mrs. Garrett," he said quietly. My new name, still strange. Mr. Garrett. I kept my spine straight. I'd learned to do that walk forward with dignity when turning back wasn't an option. I hoped the journey wasn't too difficult. It was a train. I survived it. A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe. Or approval of my directness. The cabin's about an hour's ride. We should go before dark. He took my bags without ceremony and led me to a wagon. I climbed up, arranged my skirts, and prepared myself for whatever came next. The ring in my pocket felt heavy. I'd have to put it on soon. Make this real. As we pulled away from the station, I looked back one last time. The train was already leaving, carrying other passengers back toward the world I'd left. I watched until it disappeared around a bend. Then I turned forward and didn't look back again. The ride up into the mountains stretched longer than an hour. We climbed switchbacks that made my stomach lurch, passed through forests so thick the afternoon sun barely penetrated. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty conversation. I appreciated that more than he could know. Philadelphia men had always talked too much, saying nothing. Instead, he pointed out landmarks where the creek ran clearest, which trails led to neighbors, how to read the weather in the mountain's face. Practical information for practical living. I filed it away, determined to learn quickly, to prove I wouldn't be a burden. I studied him when he wasn't looking. His hands on the reins were scarred and capable. His profile showed a straight nose, a firm jaw, eyes that watched the trail with careful attention. He didn't fidget or perform. He simply was, completely present in the moment. It was foreign to me, that kind of stillness. "Winter comes early here," he said, breaking a long silence, "and stays late. It can be hard. I'm not afraid of hard work. I believe you." He glanced at me. "You came a long way on faith. Not faith, necessity." He nodded slowly. "That's honest, at least." Honest. That word again. As if honesty had value beyond social niceties. Perhaps here it did. Perhaps in this wilderness. There was no room for the elaborate lies Philadelphia society had been built on. The cabin appeared through the pines as dusk approached small, weathered, singular. One room visible from the outside. Smoke curled from the chimney. He'd kept the fire going somehow before leaving to fetch me. The land around it was cleared, but not cultivated into the formal gardens I'd known. Wildness pressed close on all sides. He helped me down from the wagon, and I stood looking at my new home. It was clean. I could see that much. The windows were whole. The roof looked sound. But it was so small, so isolated. The nearest neighbor was how far I'd forgotten to ask. "It's not much," he said quietly. Watching my face, I lifted my chin. "It's clean. That's more than some have." Something in his expression shifted respect, maybe, or relief that I wasn't going to cry. I wanted to cry, but I'd learned not to give people that satisfaction. He led me inside. The single room held a narrow bed, a rough table with one chair, a stone fireplace, shelves with minimal possessions. Everything spoke of sufficiency. Nothing of comfort. One plate sat beside the basin, one cup, one set of utensils. He'd lived alone, needing no one, and now I'd disrupted his careful solitude. "I'll build another chair," he said. "Get more dishes from town next week." "Thank you." The formality between us felt absurd and necessary. We were married. My aunt had arranged the proxy ceremony before I left Philadelphia, but we were strangers. The bed loomed in the corner, narrow and singular. My face must have shown something, because he spoke quickly. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight." "Give you time to settle." Relief flooded through me. "That's very kind. It's practical." He moved toward the door. "There's stew in the pot. Help yourself. I'll be back at sunrise." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the small cabin that smelled of wood smoke and pine and unfamiliar masculine presence. I sat in the single chair and looked around at my new life. One room, one plate, one future. Narrow and prescribed. I pulled the ring from my pocket and slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Everything about this arrangement was practical, measured, carefully planned. Everything except the part where my heart had to live through it. That first evening, I ate standing up because I couldn't bring myself to sit in his chair. I washed the single plate and put it back. I studied the shelves and found books. Poetry, philosophy, Shakespeare. The surprise of that steadied me somehow. An educated man, choosing this isolation, choosing simplicity. Or had he been trapped here by circumstance too when darkness fell complete? I lay down in the narrow bed fully clothed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night. Wind in the pines, something small moving in the underbrush. The cabin's settling creaks. And underneath it all, the profound silence of true isolation. I'd married a stranger. I'd come to the edge of the world. I had 2 bags of possessions and a ring that fit perfectly. This was my life now. I straightened my spine even though no one could see. I'd learned to do that maintain dignity in the dark when there was no audience but myself. Morning came with his quiet knock. I'd barely slept, too aware of the strangeness of everything. But I was dressed and had already stoked the fire when I opened the door. Coffee, he offered, holding 2 cups. I took one. We stood on opposite sides of the cabin, drinking in careful silence. The coffee was bitter and strong. I'd have to learn to make it this way. Forget sugar existed. Forget sweetness was possible. We should talk, he said finally, about how this will work. I nodded. Business, then. Negotiation. I could do that. We sat at the table he'd brought another chair from somewhere, rough but functional. He seemed to need the formality of sitting across from each other, defining terms like a contract. I work most days, clearing timber, selling to the mill. Sometimes I'm gone overnight. He paused. You'll need to manage alone sometimes. I can do that. The cabin, the cooking, the garden when spring comes. I'll hunt, bring in meat. There's a root cellar needs organizing. The stove can be tricky until you learn it. I cataloged the tasks. Domestic work I'd never been trained for, but could surely learn. What else? He looked at his coffee. I won't expect things you're not ready to give. The delicacy of that statement, the careful protection of both our dignities, almost undid me. He was giving me space, time, the option to refuse intimacy until I chose otherwise. It was kind. It was also devastating. He didn't expect love because he wasn't offering it either. That's very generous. I managed. It's fair. He met my eyes. You came a long way for someone you'd never met. You deserve to find your footing first. And you? What do you need from this arrangement? He considered company, partnership, someone to share the work and the silence. I've been alone too long. He paused. And someday, maybe children, but there's no rush. We have time to figure each other out. Time? As if time would transform necessity into something else. But I appreciated his honesty more than I could say. Better to know the boundaries than stumble blindly. I agree to your terms, I said formally. He almost smiled. You make it sound like a business contract. Isn't it, maybe? He stood. But maybe it could become something more. The hope in that statement terrified me more than absolute coldness would have. Hope required vulnerability. It required believing in transformation. And I'd learned to stop believing in those things. The days that followed settled into rhythm. He left at dawn, returned at dusk. I learned the wood stove through trial and error, burning myself twice before I mastered it. I organized the root cellar, swept the cabin, mended his worn clothes. The domestic tasks gave me purpose, kept my hands busy while my mind tried to adjust. He was considerate in small ways. He'd split extra firewood before storms. He brought me a better bucket when mine cracked. He never complained about my cooking, even when I ruined the stew or let the bread burn. His quietness wasn't coldness. It was just peace. The absence of performance. 3 weeks in, I realized I hadn't thought about Philadelphia in 2 days. Hadn't measured myself against society's expectations. Hadn't performed gentility for anyone's approval. The freedom in that small absence startled me. The cabin's single room had felt suffocating at first. Now it felt sufficient. I had one dress that I washed and wore, one chair that I sat in, one life that, while narrow, had stopped feeling like punishment. Maybe poverty wasn't the worst fate. Maybe there were harder things than living simply. He came in one evening and found me reading one of his books, Wordsworth. I expected him to mind the presumption. Instead, he asked, "Do you like poetry?" I did once. I'd forgotten. "Read to me while I mend this harness." So I read. And he worked. And the evening passed in comfortable companionship that asked nothing, offered everything. When I finished, he thanked me quietly, and we sat in silence that felt different than before, charged somehow tender. That night I realized I'd set out 2 coffee cups that morning without thinking. The second cup an admission I wasn't ready to examine. But it sat there on the shelf, beside the first. Paired, matching, no longer singular. Weeks became months. Autumn painted the mountains in colors Philadelphia had never shown me, gold and crimson, so bright they hurt. I learned the mountains' rhythms, when storms gathered, which berries to pick, how to read the sky for weather changes. The land taught me things books never had. He continued his small kindnesses, each one chipping at my careful defenses. A handle carved for my water bucket that fit my hand perfectly. Extra firewood stacked without mention before each storm. The warmest corner of the cabin always left for me, as if my comfort mattered more than his own. His book surprised me most. One evening, I found him reading Keats, his rough voice gentle with the verses. The contradiction struck me, this mountain man with his scarred hands speaking poetry like a scholar. When he noticed me watching, he didn't stop or apologize. My mother was a teacher, he explained, back east. She made sure I read. You're from the East. This revelation shifted something. He'd chosen this isolation, not been trapped in it. Boston, left when I was 20. He closed the book, wanted something real, something I could build with my hands instead of just words and social obligations. I understood that impulse more than he knew. The exhaustion of performance, the hunger for authenticity. Do you miss it? Sometimes, but I don't regret leaving. He looked at me. Do you miss Philadelphia? I considered honesty. I miss what I thought it was, not what it actually was. He nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. That was becoming his pattern, seeing what I meant, without demanding I expose every wound. The domestic work brought unexpected satisfaction. Bread I'd baked myself tasted different. Earned. Clothes I'd mended lasted longer for the care. The cabin grew comfortable under my attention, small touches making it feel less stark. Dried flowers on the shelf, curtains from my old petticoat, a braided rug by the fire. He noticed each addition without comment, but his slight smiles told me he approved. We were building something together without discussing it. A life, small but sufficient. I caught myself watching for his return each evening, listening for his footsteps on the trail. The wagons creak, his quiet greeting. When had his absence become noticeable? When had his presence become necessary? One afternoon, he came back, early, and found me struggling with a stuck window. He fixed it without being asked, his hands competent and sure. I watched those hands and thought about Philadelphia suitors with their soft palms and empty promises. This man's hands told truth. They worked. They built. They healed. They never took what wasn't offered. "Thank you," I said when he finished. "You'd have figured it out." "Maybe, but it's nice not having to." He paused, studying my face. "You don't have to prove yourself every minute. You know, you've already proven yourself 10 times over." The words landed differently than he might have intended. I'd spent months trying to prove I wasn't a burden, could manage this hard life, deserved the space I occupied. And he'd been watching, seeing, acknowledging my worth without requiring the performance. Something shifted in that moment. Some wall I'd built began developing cracks. That evening we read together, taking turns, trading verses. His deep voice and my lighter one alternating through Whitman's Song of Myself. When we finished, the silence between us felt rich instead of empty, charged with possibility. "I like your voice," he said quietly. "I like yours too." The admission felt enormous. I'd liked things about him for weeks, but hadn't allowed myself to name them. His gentleness with injured birds. His patience, teaching me the stove. The way he never made me feel inadequate for not knowing mountain life. But saying I liked something about him that was crossing a line from arrangement into something more personal. He smiled, rare and genuine. "Good. That's good to know." 6 months in, I understood I'd stopped enduring and started living. There was no single moment of transformation, just a gradual thawing I hadn't noticed until I realized I was warm. I'd wake and feel anticipation instead of dread. I'd catch myself humming while working. Small joys, accumulating into something I couldn't quite name yet. But the warmth terrified me. Because warmth meant vulnerability. It meant I'd let him matter. And letting people matter had only ever brought me pain. Still, I found myself setting out 2 coffee cups each morning, preparing meals with care because he'd notice and appreciate them, mending his clothes with extra attention. Small acts of tenderness I couldn't quite stop myself from offering. He gave them back, leaving wildflowers on the table. Cluttering up the pasture, he claimed. Building a bookshelf for my few remaining volumes, reading aloud evenings while I worked. Creating small comforts that made the cabin feel less like exile and more like home. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps, when his silence became familiar, when I began to miss it when he was gone. The wondering itself was answer enough. Late summer brought heat that pressed close. I worked harder than I'd ever worked. Keeping the garden, preserving food, preparing for winter I'd been warned would come early and stay late. The physical labor exhausted me in ways Philadelphia life never had. But it was good exhaustion, earned rest instead of anxious weariness. I burned my hand badly on the stove. Careless moment, tired and distracted. The pain came sharp and immediate, breaking through my careful control. I tried to stay silent, but couldn't stop the sob that escaped. He was there instantly, abandoning his work to tend the wound. He led me to the chair, brought cool water, wrapped the burn with surprising skill. His hands were gentle despite their roughness. His concern was real despite our careful arrangement. "It's nothing." I tried to say, "It's not nothing." He looked at me. "You don't have to pretend with me." And something in his steady gaze broke through every defense I'd built. The tears came, not just from the pain, but from everything. Months of trying to prove I could manage this life. Fear I'd fail. Exhaustion from performing competence every moment. The weight of being alone, even when he was there, because I wouldn't let him close. I wept like I hadn't since Philadelphia fell apart. Great gasping sobs that shook my whole body. He held my uninjured hand and let me cry. Didn't try to fix it or stop it or tell me I was being irrational. Just sat with me in the breaking when I could finally speak. Words spilled out I'd never meant to share. About Philadelphia, about Father's business failure and society's immediate abandonment. About the friends who'd vanished like morning mist. About Thomas Bradford, who'd courted me for 6 months, then couldn't remember my name once the money was gone. I was invisible, I heard myself saying. Once there was no dowry, no connections, no advantage to knowing me I disappeared. Like I'd never mattered at all. "You matter," he said quietly. "To me, you've always mattered." Because I'm useful, no. His voice was firm. Because you're you. The way you read poetry with your whole heart. How you arrange wildflowers even though we're poor. The dignity you bring to every small task. I see you. The real you. And I chose you. I wanted to believe him. The wanting was terrifying because belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability. And I'd learned vulnerability only led to pain. But his eyes held steady. His hand around mine was warm and certain. "I didn't just need a wife," he continued. "I needed you specifically. Your strength, your honesty, the way you face hard things without complaining. You came west on faith, and you've built something beautiful out of nothing." He paused. "You think you're here by accident. You're not. I chose you. I keep choosing you." The words settled into me like seeds into soil, deep and transformative. He saw me, not the useful worker, not the practical arrangement, me, all of me, including the parts I tried to hide. I was so afraid, I whispered, that this would be like Philadelphia, that I'd only matter as long as I was useful, that you'd, "I won't, I promise you, I won't." How can you promise that? Because I know what it's like to be wanted for the wrong reasons. I know what it's like to wonder if anyone sees past the surface. His voice was rough with emotion. We've both been there. We both know better. In that moment, I understood he'd been as afraid as me. Just as guarded, just as hurt by past betrayals. We'd been circling each other carefully, both terrified of reaching out and being refused. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," I said. "Then don't be. Not with me. Never with me." He stayed beside me through the afternoon, changing the bandage, bringing water, reading aloud while I rested. The burn throbbed, but the pain felt distant compared to the crack forming in my armor. I'd let him see me break. And he hadn't turned away. He'd moved closer. That evening, my hand bandaged and throbbing, we sat together instead of in separate corners, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. He read poetry, and I listened with my eyes closed, letting his voice wash over me like healing. When he finished, I reached for his hand with my uninjured one. He took it carefully, like something precious. We sat that way until the fire burned low, not speaking, just being together in the silence that had stopped feeling empty and started feeling full. That night, across the small room, he still slept by the fire. Giving me the bed, I lay awake, understanding that something fundamental had changed. I'd shown him my wounds, and he'd tended them. I'd confessed my fears, and he'd met them with his own. The wall between us had developed serious cracks. Maybe it was time to let it fall completely. Early snow came in October, catching us unprepared. One day autumn, the next day winter, pressing down hard and mean. The temperature dropped fast and vicious. He came in from checking the animals, shaking with cold. And I knew immediately something was wrong. Just chilled, he said. But his voice was off. By evening, the fever had him. High and burning, making him shake despite the blankets I piled on. For 3 days and nights, I fought to keep him alive while the storm raged outside, trapping us completely. I'd thought I knew fear. The whispers in Philadelphia, the train west, that first night in the cabin. But watching him burn with fever delirious, slipping away, that was different. That was losing something I only just realized I had. That was grief before death. And it was unbearable. I did everything I could think of. Melted snow for water, forced broth past his cracked lips, kept the fire burning, made decisions alone because there was no one else. Used our dwindling supplies without hesitation because his life mattered more than rationing. The second night, I sat beside him holding his hot hand, too terrified to sleep. He was talking in his delirium. Fragments that made no sense. Then clearly, achingly clear, "Don't leave. Please don't leave me. I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Need you. Can't lose you, too." Whatever he'd lost before, whoever had left him. The wound was still there. We'd both been abandoned in our ways, both learned to protect ourselves, both built walls that kept everyone out. But in that moment, with death circling close, the walls felt like stupidity instead of wisdom. What good was protection if it meant dying alone? What good was safety if it prevented living? "I love you," I told him, even though he couldn't hear, wouldn't remember. "I love you, and you can't die. You can't leave me when I finally figured it out." The admission cracked something in my chest. I loved him. Not the convenience, not the arrangement. Him. His quietness that was peace, not coldness. His hands that built and healed. His steady presence that had become my home. I loved him completely, terrifyingly, without reservation. The third day, the fever broke. He slept peacefully for the first time, his breathing steady instead of labored. I sat watching dawn light creep across the floor and understood I'd been changed by those 3 days. Terror had burned away every pretense. I couldn't go back to careful distance. Couldn't pretend this was just arrangement. My heart had declared itself, and there was no taking it back. His recovery took weeks. During those slow days, we talked more than we had in all the months before. He told me about his family, his parents' deaths, why he'd come west. I told him about the woman I'd been in Philadelphia and the woman I was becoming here. "I was afraid," he admitted one afternoon, "when you came off that train, afraid you'd regret this choice." "Regret me?" "I did at first," I said honestly. "Not you specifically. Just the situation, the poverty, the isolation. And now," I looked at him, still pale from illness, vulnerable in ways he never usually allowed. "Now I understand that poverty and wealth aren't about money. I've been richer here than I ever was in Philadelphia." He reached for my hand. I gave it without hesitation. We sat that way while the afternoon faded, both of us understanding something had shifted permanently. The crisis had revealed what we'd been too afraid to name. We loved each other, simply, completely, without reservation. "When I was sick," he said quietly, "I heard you, telling me not to leave." My face heated. "You weren't supposed to remember that." "I remembered all of it." He squeezed my hand. "I love you too. Have for months. Was just too afraid to say it." The confession hung between us, precious and fragile. We'd both been so afraid of wanting, of needing, of letting another person matter. And here we were, admitting everything. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Stop being afraid, maybe. Stop pretending this is just arrangement." He smiled. "Let it be what it actually is." "And what's that, love?" "Real, complicated, messy love between two people who've been hurt before and are trying to do better this time." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling his solid warmth, his steady breathing. We'd been given a second chance, both of us. A chance to choose differently, love better, risk everything for something real. Outside, winter was coming in earnest. But inside the cabin, wrapped in quilts and each other's presence, I felt warm for the first time in years. Not physically warm, soul warm. The kind of warmth that comes from being truly seen, truly chosen, truly loved. Deep winter arrived. The kind of cold that made the cabin walls seem thin. Snow piled high, isolating us completely. Some days I couldn't see the trees through the white. We were sealed in our small world, just us and the fire and time moving slowly. It should have felt peaceful. We'd confessed our love. The pretense was gone. But instead of relief, I felt panic building. Late one night, unable to sleep, the doubts ambushed me with vicious clarity. Was this real, or was I fooling myself? Had I convinced myself I was happy because accepting unhappiness was unbearable? Was I in love, or was I just grateful for kindness after cruelty? Did I truly want this life? Or had I just learned to love my cage? The question spiraled. What if I had options? Real options. Would I choose this? Would I choose him? Or had I done what broken people do and made peace with limitation by calling it choice? My aunt's letter sat in my pocket. It had arrived before the snow, before his illness. I'd tucked it away without reading it fully. Now I pulled it out, hands shaking, train fare. She wrote, a job in her Denver shop, a chance to restart. Options I'd thought were gone. The temptation was immediate and shameful. I could leave. Could go back to something resembling my old life. Not Philadelphia society, but civilization. comfort. A future that didn't involve isolation and endless winters and praying the supplies lasted. I sat by the dying fire while he slept and forced myself to be ruthlessly honest. If Philadelphia society welcomed me back tomorrow, the comfort, the status, the easy life, would I stay here? Would I still choose him? Or had I just convinced myself to love what I couldn't escape? My mind cataloged memories like evidence in a trial. The first coffee shared in careful silence, his carved bucket handle, reading poetry together. The wildflowers he claimed were cluttering his pasture, his voice saying, "I see you." My hand in his during the fever, his confession of love. But evidence can be interpreted different ways. Those moments could be real connection, or they could be survival instinct dressed as romance. How did I know the difference I imagined leaving? The train east, working in my aunt's shop. Different life. Freedom from this isolated, hard existence. My old self whispered, "Don't settle. Don't confuse gratitude for love. Don't mistake lack of alternatives for choice." But then I made myself complete the imagination. Life without him. Different bed. Different dawn light. Different silence, the empty kind, instead of the shared kind. No rough hands that knew gentleness. No quiet voice reading poetry. No steady presence that had become my home. And I understood I'd mourn. Not the cabin, not even the mountain. Him. I'd mourn him like death. That was the answer I'd been afraid to find. I loved him. Not because I had to. Not because he'd saved me, or I owed him, or I had no other options. I loved him because he was good and kind and real. Because in his presence, I was more myself than I'd ever been. Because his silence felt like peace, and his voice felt like home, and his love felt like truth. The crucial revelation hit me. Then I had a choice. I'd always had a choice. I could leave right now. Take my aunt's offer. The door wasn't locked. The cage was open. Knowing that really knowing I could walk away made my staying real. Made it choice instead of capitulation. Made it love instead of necessity. I fed my aunt's letter to the fire and watched the escape burn. Then I crossed the small room to where he slept and stood looking at him in the firelight. This man who'd been patient, who'd given me space to find myself, who'd loved me even when I was afraid to love him back. Tomorrow I'd tell him. Tomorrow I'd risk everything and tell him I was staying. Not because I couldn't leave, but because I wouldn't leave. Because he was my choice. My real, free, uncomplicated choice. Tonight I'd just stand here in the dark and feel the terrifying, beautiful weight of it. I'd stopped being afraid. Or rather, I was still afraid of how much I needed him. How completely he'd become essential. But the fear no longer controlled me. Love was worth the risk. He was worth the risk. We were worth the risk. I touched his shoulder gently. He stirred, opened his eyes. In the dim firelight, we looked at each other, and something passed between us that didn't need words. Understanding, commitment, promise. "I love you," I said. "I'm staying. Not because I have to. Because I want to." He reached for my hand, pulled me down beside him. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me. Good. We can be terrified together. He laughed softly. Sounds like a solid foundation for a marriage. The best kind. The honest kind. We sat together as the fire died and the cold pressed close and the mountain held us in its vast, indifferent embrace. And I understood I'd found something rare, not perfect love or easy love, but real love. The kind built on truth and tested by hardship and proven by choice. The kind worth keeping. Spring morning, the snow finally melting, first green showing through the white. He asked me to walk with him, his nervousness unusual. We'd been close since winter, truly close, without pretense or performance. So his tension puzzled me. We climbed higher than I'd been before, through pines I didn't recognize, over a ridge I hadn't known existed. The exercise felt good after winter's confinement, but he stayed quiet, hands shoved in pockets, jaw tight. "What's wrong?" I finally asked. "Nothing's wrong. There's something I need to show you." We crested the ridge. The valley spread below us, and there, impossible, shocking, stood a mansion, elegant and vast. Windows, catching sunlight, gardens carefully maintained despite appearing abandoned. Real wealth made visible. I stopped walking, couldn't process what I was seeing. My mind couldn't make sense of the contradiction. The cabin, the poverty, the simple life. And now this. "I needed to know," he said quietly behind me. "I needed to know you'd stay." The words landed wrong, confused. Then understanding crashed in like a wave. The cabin was a test. The poverty was theater. Everything the months of struggle, my hard-won contentment. The simple life I'd learned to love, based on a lie. You. My voice came out strangled. This whole time, "I'm sorry, I know it seems," I whirled on him. "You made our entire marriage an audition. You watched me struggle and learn and fail and never told me it was unnecessary. I had to know. What if I'd stay? If I'd pass your test?" The betrayal burned through me, hot and righteous. You had all the power and you played with my heart like it was a game. It wasn't a game. It was, what research and experiment did you enjoy watching me adapt to poverty you could have spared? Me. He flinched. No, I hated it. Every day I hated lying. But my brother, his wife, left the moment his business failed. I watched love evaporate when money did. I had to know you were different. So you tested me. Like I was applying for a position instead of building a life. Yes, I'm sorry. You're right to be angry. I was more than angry. I was devastated. The months in the cabin, my transformation, my hard-won peace. My discovery of what mattered all happened under false pretenses. Had any of it been real? Had I truly changed or just convinced myself to accept a situation that was secretly optional? "I need to walk," I said, voice shaking. "Please, let me explain. No, I need space. I need to think without you standing there watching me process this." I turned and walked, ran away from him and the mansion and the revelation. My feet carried me without destination, just moving, trying to outpace the thoughts chasing me. He'd lied for months, watched me struggle and never offered relief. The cabin I'd grown to love was a stage. The poverty I'd learned to embrace was performance. And I'd been the only one who didn't know. But anger wasn't the only thing I felt. Underneath it was something more complicated. Because what had I actually learned in that cabin? That I could be happy without luxury. That I valued character over wealth. That simple joys brought deeper satisfaction than elaborate comforts. That I loved him for himself, not his resources. Those lessons were real. My growth was real. The contentment I'd found wasn't based on the poverty being necessary. It was based on discovering what I truly valued. His test had been for him, but the discovery had been mine. I sat on a fallen log and made myself think it through. His brother's wife had left him. Mine had in a different way. We'd both learned that love could be conditional, that people could want us for wrong reasons. His fear was as valid as mine. He'd needed to know I'd stay through hardship. I'd needed to know I could thrive with little. The test had proven both things, but it still hurt. The deception still wounded. The months of unnecessary struggle still angered me. Even if I understood his fear, even if the lessons were valuable, he should have told me. Should have trusted me with the truth instead of managing my experience like an experiment. I walked back slowly, rehearsing what I'd say. The anger was still there, but no longer controlling me. Understanding didn't erase betrayal, but it contextualized it, made it comprehensible, if not excusable. He was standing where I'd left him, looking small and uncertain in a way I'd never seen. When he saw me approaching, he straightened, but didn't move toward me. "I'm still angry," I said without preamble. "You should be. You should have told me. Trusted me with the truth. I know. You're absolutely right. But..." I took a breath. "I understand why you didn't. I understand the fear. I've had the same fear that I was wanted for the wrong reasons. That love would evaporate when circumstances changed." He nodded, eyes wet. "What you did was wrong. The deception was wrong. Making me live through months of hardship. You could have spared me. That was wrong." "I know. I'm so sorry." But what I learned during those months that was real, I did discover what I valued. I did prove I could choose character over comfort, not to you, to myself. You gave me a test, yes? But you also gave me a gift, the chance to discover who I really was, without the distraction of wealth. You don't have to forgive me. I'm not finished. I stepped closer. I need you to understand this. I'm choosing to stay, not because I've already invested time, not because leaving would be admitting failure. I'm choosing to stay because I love you, because these months proved what matters to me. And what matters is you, your character, your kindness, the life we built together, even after the lie. I'm still angry about the lie. I might be angry for a while, but I understand it. And I'm choosing to move forward anyway. I took his hand. I'm choosing you, knowing everything now, knowing I have options. I'm choosing you freely, completely, without reservation. His face crumpled. I don't deserve that. Maybe not. But you have it anyway. Because love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. And I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. He pulled me close, holding tight. We stood that way for a long time, processing everything, letting the revelation settle into new understanding. "The cabin," I said finally. "I want to keep it. Use it sometimes. Remember what we learned there. Of course, whatever you want. And the mansion, we use it for good. Support neighbors, create opportunities. Make the wealth serve purpose instead of just existing. Yes, absolutely. Yes." I pulled back to look at him. "This doesn't erase the deception, but we build from here, together. With honesty, real honesty this time. I promise. Complete honesty. No more tests, no more lies. Good." I managed a small smile. "Because I'm not doing this again. Once was plenty." He laughed shakily. "Once was more than enough." We walked back over the ridge together, hand in hand. The mansion waited below, representing everything I'd once thought I wanted, and everything I'd learned didn't matter. The cabin was beyond it, small and weathered and precious for what it had taught us both. This was my life now, not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd settled for, but the one I'd chosen, freely, knowingly, with all the information, and that choice felt like the realest thing I'd ever done. We didn't move to the mansion immediately. We stayed in the cabin for weeks, talking through everything, renegotiating our marriage with all cards visible. It felt like starting over, but better this time. Honest. Equal. Real. When we finally moved, I insisted we keep the cabin maintained. It's where we learned the truth. I told him. About ourselves. About what matters. I don't want to forget that. He understood. He always understood now. The deception had taught him something, too, that trust required truth. That love couldn't be built on tests. That partnership meant sharing power, not hoarding it. The mansion became a tool rather than an identity. We hosted community gatherings, helped neighbors through hard times, created opportunities for others. The wealth served purpose, but didn't define us. We knew who we were without it. That knowledge made all the difference. Sometimes I show the cabin to visitors, and they pity what they think I endured there. They don't understand. That small, weathered place gave me more than any mansion could. It gave me myself, stripped of pretense, free of performance, just the essential core of who I really was. That discovery was worth every hard moment. People ask if I forgave him for the deception. The question misses the point. Forgiveness assumes clean categories of injury and healing. But what he did wounded and healed simultaneously. He gave me the gift of necessity wrapped in deception. And in that necessity, I found freedom. How do you resent the thing that set you free? I won't pretend it was easy. Some days, I remember the exhaustion, the fear, the constant proving of worth I thought was required. Those memories still sting. But they're also proof I can handle hard things. Proof I can find joy in simplicity. Proof my character isn't contingent on comfort. The richest life isn't measured by what you own. I learned that in a cabin with one chair and 2 coffee cups and a man who loved me enough to risk losing me. By telling the truth, eventually, imperfectly, but ultimately honestly. We still go back to the cabin, our small place in the pines where everything began. When life gets complicated, when the weight of resources feels heavy, when we need to remember what matters, we go there. We drink coffee from those same cups. We sit in that same small space. We remember the truth we learned, You can have everything and nothing, or you can have what matters. We chose what matters. We chose each other. The mansion is beautiful. The wealth is useful. The comfort is pleasant, but none of it defines us. None of it is essential. What's essential is the character we discovered in that cabin. The love we built through hardship and tested by revelation. The choice we made, both of us, to value authenticity over ease. Sometimes in the cabin evenings, I watch firelight on his face like I did that first winter. The difference is, I'm not fighting the warmth anymore. I'm not protecting myself from needing him. I let myself feel it completely. The love, the gratitude, the joy of choosing and being chosen. "What are you thinking?" he asks, catching me watching. That I'm glad I got on that train. Glad my aunt wrote that letter. Glad I said yes to a stranger in the mountains. Even knowing what you know now, especially knowing what I know now, I take his hand. Because I understand the difference between settling and choosing. And I chose this. I chose you. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. He squeezes my hand. Best decision I ever made was asking you to come. Second best. I correct. The best was telling me the truth. Eventually, he laughs. We've reached the place where we can laugh about it. The wound has healed into a scar that reminds us what we survived and what we learned. Outside the cabin window, spring is turning into summer. The mountains are green and alive. Somewhere beyond them is the mansion, the wealth, the comfort. But here in this small room, drinking bitter coffee and sharing comfortable silence, I understand what richness really means. It means knowing yourself, testing your values, discovering what you'll fight for. It means choosing love without the distraction of resources and discovering that love is enough. It means learning that character is the only currency that truly matters, and everything else is just decoration. I'd spent my life measuring worth in external terms: status, wealth, social position. Philadelphia taught me those things were unstable. The mountain taught me what was stable. And the cabin, that's simple. Weathered, precious place taught me who I was underneath everything else. The woman who left Philadelphia on that train was afraid and proud and convinced she knew what mattered. The woman sitting in this cabin now knows different, knows better, knows that the richest life isn't about what you have, but about who you become in the process of getting. There, I've become someone I'm proud of. Someone who values authenticity. Someone who can find joy in simplicity. Someone brave enough to love completely despite the risk. Someone who chooses character over comfort every time. That woman was always inside me. But it took a small cabin, a patient man, and months of perceived poverty to reveal her. The mansion hidden in the valley was his secret. But the treasure I found in myself during those months, that discovery was mine. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.